Hi, I'm Delphine. I'm the creator behind Just Patterns, where I released high-end sewing patterns inspired by trends and by luxury fashion. And today I wanted to give you a little bit more insights in terms of why I designed the Julie jeans. So I was a teen in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I loved lower waist baggy jeans. I know it's a bit controversial because a lot of people were really happy when the low waist trousers trend went away, and now they are kind of coming back. But honestly, in my case, I'm just so happy it's back. I loved it then and I love it now. But of course, trends never come back exactly the same. So if back in, let's say 2005, I wore very similar jeans, very wide leg, very low waist. Actually, I remember they were from Levi's. Now they're a bit different because back then the rise was actually very small. So you had no choice. You had to wear them low. And in terms of comfort also, like, it was not always super practical. Like, you know, it could dig into your waist, it could dig into your high hip. And now I feel like the idea behind the Julie jeans is more to wear them more in a slouchy, like slightly oversized, as if they were meant to be worn higher, but you just slung them on your high hip instead of wearing them at your natural waist. And that the combination of this dropped rise and also the lot of ease that we put into the hip, it really makes it super comfortable jeans. It's jeans that I've been wearing for weeks on repeat. I have 3 samples, one that is actually not very well made because it was really a test, and I have the 2 last ones that we use for the photos. And when they are all in the wash, I'm just so sad. I wear jeans almost every day, if not every day. I sit at a computer most time of my day, so for me comfort is really important, and that's something that I wanted to achieve with the Julie jeans. Another important feature that you will have noticed is the tabs that we have on the sides. I think if you remember wearing this trend, or if you're wearing it now, the dragging of the jeans is at the same time kind of cool, the way it pulls over the shoe, but sometimes it's also highly impractical. And I'm thinking especially when it rains. The season where it rains a lot, the winter in Lisbon is just finishing, and I was so happy to have the ability when it starts raining suddenly and I'm in the street running some errands to just hike up my jeans a little bit, button them a little higher to make sure that they're not dragging on the floor. The other added value of that is that you can really create more combinations between your shoes and your jeans, so it's really nice to wear them higher up when you're wearing flats, when you're wearing slip-ons, when you're creating a summery outfit, when you're wearing your sneakers. And if you want to wear like a small block heel, a little booty under, anything that will have some height, you can wear them lower. You can unbutton and use the first position of the button tab. You can wear them lower and just have it reach the bottom of your shoe, which is a really nice extra little feature. Now for the inside, if you know my patterns, you know that I like the insides to be as nice as the outside. So we're talking about flat fell seams for the inseam, for the rise front and back. We are talking about the option to put bias binding everywhere around the waist area, and that's the option I'm going to be showing to you today in the tutorial. So that's it. I hope you will enjoy the Julie jeans as much as I do, and let's get started and make some jeans. Let's talk about the fabric and the supplies you're gonna need for the Julie jeans. So what I'm gonna be using today is this very beautiful denim that was gifted to me by Yard Blocks. It's actually a cotton and hemp blend, which gives it this really nice weight. It's similar to a cotton linen blend. I think it's gonna be really pleasant to wear, but at the same time, it does maintain kind of the rugged appearance of denim. So that's what I really like about it. And with it, I have thread. So I have Topstitching thread in a contrasting color. I also have regular thread matching color to do the bobbin thread, but also to do the regular sewing. I have reasonably matching serger thread to go with it. I have a metal zipper. So the length of the metal zipper, it will depend based on the size that you are making, and you need to check the instructions to see which one you need. We're gonna be using 5 classic denim buttons. For this one, I'm gonna want to try these ones that you can screw into instead of hitting with a hammer. So we'll see how that goes. more thread. I'm gonna be doing the finish around the waist and in the zipper area with this cotton bias binding. I didn't feel like making my own today, so I got some pre-packaged at the store. This is 100% cotton and we're gonna be using it folded in half. I have a little tag that I hope I will not forget to put. I also have a cotton muslin to cut my pocket bags. That's my preference because that's kind of this classic denim look. But if you have anything else more fun that you want to use in your stash, feel free. This is a nice 100% cotton muslin. And I have interfacing. I only use a net fusible interfacing. I don't like woven fusible interfacing, so that's my preference. As long as it's a good match for your fabric, you can use any interfacing that you have on hand. And we're also going to be reinforcing certain areas, such as the pocket openings, with the fusible tape. This one is the kind that has the stitching across it. This is from Vliesleen, but if you cannot find this, you can also cut strips of your main interfacing for this work. Now that I said this, I'm also going to show you some other fabric options that I have. This one is stunning. This is Japanese denim from Denim Lab. It's dead stock store in the Netherlands. This is 7 ounces, so about 230, 50 gram per square meter. It is really beautiful. Now, what happens is that this is Japanese denim and as a result is narrower. So you do need to buy a bit more fabric than intended, but that's also a really beautiful option for the Julia jeans. A thicker option is this 100% cotton from Devassos. It's an online Portuguese store, 100% organic cotton, about, I would say, 9.5 ounces, 330 gram per square meter. This is really on the thicker side for this design, so this is the upper limit. I would not go more than this for this design. And lastly, another very lightweight option. This one is from the Fabric Sales. It's 210 gram per square meter, about 6.5 ounces. It is nice, it's very flowy, but it has maybe a little bit less of a classic denim look. But if you're looking for something a bit more tailored or a bit more dressed up, that can also be a really nice option. Now, let's get started. I'm done cutting my fabric and my interfacing, and I just wanted to point out a few details to you. The first one is to make sure that you're going to be assembling your jeans like classic jeans inspired by menswear, with the front left going over the right left. And for that, you need to make sure that you are cutting your fly facing pattern piece with the right side of the fabric facing up and with the sticky side of the interfacing ready to go onto the wrong side. Now that we have done this, we can start transferring all our markings and cutting all our notches to facilitate construction later. And the one piece for which this is particularly important and you need to do a little bit of extra work is the front leg. The front leg is not cut symmetrically because of the fly and the fly facing. So we need to do a couple of things to the front before we move forward. The first one is going to be to transfer our little mark that we have here. So I'm going to do that very easily with just thread tracing. This is cotton basting thread. And I'm going to go into my mark, pass on the other side, leave extra thread on both sides, and just cut. For now, I'm going to be also transferring the notches that are directly here before I remove any pin. And now I'm just going to remove these pins that are in this higher position of the leg so that I can remove the right side of the leg. So I'm going to cut between the two layers to make sure that my thread is going to be on both sides. And I'm going to remove what is going to become the right leg, which is already cut on the right side. So I'm going to remove the right leg out of the way. I'm going to keep the left side here, just under. So now I only have my left side. I'm going to add a couple of pins just to make sure that I'm not out of shape. And now I'm going to be cutting along this line to make sure that it's a little bit shorter and that this is actually going to be at the center front. The little extension here will allow for the zipper to be a little bit inside and less visible when you're wearing your jeans. So let me cut that line here. And now I'm gonna continue transferring all my notches, all my pocket placements on all the pattern pieces before I move on to the interfacing. Once I was done marking all my pieces and transferring the notches, I applied my interfacing. So I applied it to my waistband. I'm making size 38, so my waistband is just one long big piece that will be folded in two. But if you are making the 46 to 60 size range, you have a curved waistband with side seams, which means that you have 6 pieces to cut in fabric and to interface. Now we also have our fly facing that is interfaced. We have our waistband tabs, and I also already pre-pressed them to gain a little bit of time later during construction. We have our fly shield that is interfaced to the wrong side and already pre-pressed. And we have the pieces that we're going to be using next. This is our coin pocket, our 2 back patch pockets, and as you can see, we have stabilized the upper edge with a 2 centimeter strip of interfacing to make sure that they don't get distorted over time. This is particularly important because we're using lighter weight denim. And finally, we have our 2 fronts that are now not symmetrical. We have our right front that has the extension where the fly shield is gonna be. And we have our left front that is cut a little bit shorter, and where this is where we will be assembling the fly facing. And finally, we have also interfaced with fusible tape the edges of the front pocket openings for the same reason as earlier, just to make sure they don't get distorted over time. Let's move to our patch pockets for the Julia jeans. Let's start with our pockets and center back seams. So looking at the anatomy of our pockets, we have very classic 5-pocket jeans. We have 2 patch pockets at the back, so we have them here. And at the front, we have 2 curved pocket openings with a patch pocket, a coin pocket on the front right side. So this is gonna be a very simple construction. We're gonna top stitch the top of our patch pockets. We're gonna put them where they belong, on the back legs and on the pocket facing on the right side. And then we're gonna top stitch them parallel 2 times all around the pockets to secure them. For the front pocket, I'm using cotton muslin for my pocket bag. It's going to be closed with a French seam at the bottom, and inside we just have serged or overlocked our pocket facing and secured with a line of stitching to our pocket bag. And finally, our last step is just to baste our pocket front all in place so that it doesn't continue moving during the construction. Let's get started on these pockets. And what we're gonna start by doing is folding the upper edge and top stitching it. So I'm gonna be using the pattern piece to help me as a guide to get my pressed edge really straight, like so. And I'm gonna be pressing it first completely. And then I'm gonna be folding half of the seam allowance back on the inside so that I have pressed the right amount. And now we have our full folded upper edge of the pocket. I'm gonna be doing the same thing for the other back pocket and the coin pocket, and then we're gonna go and top stitch them. A quick tip that I want to mention before I start is that before stitching a new fabric or a new layer, or right after changing my threads, I will always do a test to make sure that the fabric and the tension, everything is correct. And that is a very quick tip. It's very easy, but it has really changed my sewing. So let's just first see that everything is fine with the top stitching thread in and with 3 layers of fabric, which is the same thing we're gonna be sewing once we do the top of our pockets. So let's go. And I really like the result. The length of the stitch is right. The tension seems right also, so let's go with that. For top stitching, I want to show you a very useful little tool, and that's a double compensating presser foot. So it has this compensating foot part that will help align with the edges when you are top stitching, and it's a double compensating foot because it has the possibility to align right here at this edge and also right here at this edge. So when you are making denim with a lot of double top stitching on single needle machines, this will be a very useful tool, and that's the one I'm going to be installing every time that I plan to top stitch or double stitch top stitch next to a folded edge. Okay, so let's start with our coin pocket, and for the first line of top stitching, I'm gonna align it with the inner edge of my foot. And I'm not gonna do any back stitching so that I avoid problems on the inside, since this is top stitching thread and we're gonna be folding it under, folding the edge under later. So this is my first line of stitching. And for the second line of stitching, this is a 1/4 inch away, and this is gonna be a little bit too close for the top of the pocket. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna use the folded edge here on the inside, and I'm gonna align it to the same inner edge of my presser foot. And there we have it. So I'm gonna be doing exactly the same thing for the top edge of the back pockets. Our 3 pockets have been top stitched. Now we're gonna be pressing them, placing them before attaching them to where they belong. Starting with our coin pocket, I folded to the wrong side 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimeter on each side of the coin pocket, and I placed it on the pocket facing that will go on the right side of the jeans. I aligned these 2 corners with the thread markings that we had transferred earlier, and now it's ready to be top stitched. So here we have our back pocket. We're gonna be using the back pocket template to make sure that it's the right shape and size. So I'm gonna start by aligning the top edge. So this is basically the pocket piece without any seam allowance. And it's included in your pattern pieces, so you can just cut it on one page and try to use it for that purpose. So I'm aligning it with the top edge, and I'm gonna be folding the edges all along and then pressing. Going all around my template. And this will ensure that your pockets are both the right shape and that they are symmetrical. We can now remove the template. Give it a press on the right side as well, and placing it to the back with some pins to make sure that we have our pocket in position on each side. So we have aligned the 4 corners here with our thread tracing of earlier and place some pins on the inside. Let's go and double top stitch all the folded edges at the machine. I'm gonna be top stitching my patch pockets. So let's start with one of the back patch pockets, and I'm gonna be starting with the upper edge. So about 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch. I'm gonna actually top stitch on top of that first line of top stitching here so that I add extra security. And here I'm gonna do some back stitches also to make it really solid. I stop with my needle down, I pivot, and I'm gonna follow that inner edge of my foot to make sure that I stay at the same distance from my folded edge. And I always stop with my needle down to facilitate the turns before I lift my presser foot. I'll make sure my work is flat so I don't catch anything under my top stitching. And we'll go all around the pocket. And when I reach the top, first I'm gonna make sure that my folded edge is well tucked inside. And also possible thread, just for a cleaner result. And when I reach the top, I keep my needle down, I pivot, and I'm gonna pass over my first top stitching for 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch again. And now I can do my second line of top stitching. And for this one, I'm gonna be using that second edge of my foot, which is right here. So I'm gonna align my folded edge to this foot. I'm gonna start at the top, few back stitches, and then just follow the folded edge. And back stitches at the end. I'm also ready to top stitch my coin pocket onto my right pocket facing. with 2 lines of parallel top stitching, and the way this pocket bag will be closed is when we serge all around the pocket facing. And I'm also going to top stitch my second back pocket. Let's start working on assembling our back. So the first step is going to be assembling the back legs with the yokes using flat fell seam. And the thing that you really must be careful about when assembling the yoke is to make sure that you position it correctly. For some reason, there is always a temptation to assemble yokes this way. Don't ask me why. I do it. My testers do it. Everybody tends to do it. So make sure that you use the notches that are on the pattern pieces to align the yoke properly and to not exchange them by mistake. And also the other little trick is that you can remember that the longest edge here, the longer edge of the yoke actually aligns with the center back. So let's start by aligning the yoke and pinning. So here, especially on the 46-60 size range, you want to start by aligning the notches and then going towards the edges, because the curve is quite different on the edge of the leg and on the bottom of the yoke, so that can create the discrepancy. The seam does match at the seam line, but not necessarily at the edge of the seam allowance. So we pin right sides together. And now let's pin the second leg and start stitching at the machine. To stitch the yoke to the back, I'm gonna be doing a flat fell seam in different steps, and this is gonna start with an assembly right sides together, 1.5 centimeter, 5/8 of an inch from the edge. I do not have this marking of 1.5 on the plate of my sewing machine, so what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna be using a magnetic tool to make sure that I'm exact and I keep right to the edge, and I'm just gonna measure 1.5 from my needle position, 5/8 of an inch, and I'm gonna position my magnet there parallel so that I can align the raw edge to it while I'm sewing. And I went back to regular thread instead of top stitching thread in my needle, and I also went back to my regular presser foot instead of the compensating one. So let's start with one of the back stitches at the beginning. Now I'm gonna remove my pins, and I'm gonna start by trimming one of the seam allowances on the side where I'm gonna want to fold my seam allowances for the flat fell seam. So for the yoke seam, we're gonna want to fold the seam allowance up so that we do the top stitching actually on the yoke. And that means that I'm gonna have to trim that seam allowance in half, then fold over the back leg seam allowance, enclosing this trimmed edge, press it to the yoke, and then top stitch it twice with top stitching thread in the needle and with my top stitching presser foot. First time just 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters from the folded edge, and then 1/4 inch or just short of 3/8 of an inch from the folded edge for the second line of top stitching. I pressed and trimmed my seam allowances. So here I have pressed the seam allowance folded in two up towards the yoke and closing the seam allowance of the back that has been trimmed in half. And now I'm gonna top stitch twice. So I move to my top stitching thread in the needle and my top stitching foot. And I'm gonna start with the closest to the folded edge. And now the second. And now do the same thing for the second leg. I prepared my center back flat fell seam by assembling the two legs along the crotch with a 1.5 5/8 of an inch seam allowance with a regular stitch. And since we're going to be pressing our flat fell seam towards the left leg, I also trimmed the left side seam allowance and folded the right side over, enclosing the raw edge of the seam allowance. And I did all of this at the iron to make sure that everything was neat. Now, sometimes with some machines and when we're sewing denim, you might have a concern that the extra volume here is going to create a struggle because we have actually several layers of denim, and to top stitch evenly, it's going to become difficult. So here, Your trusty tool is gonna be your hammer, and anytime that your machine struggles to go over layers and over bulk in denim, I really suggest giving it a few hits with a hammer. It will help a lot, and a lot more than maybe you imagine. So let's hammer it, and then I will go and top stitch it twice. Now that our back is done, let's look at the anatomy of our front pockets. I already overlocked around my pocket facing, so now I'm just gonna stitch over or in the area of my overlocked edge to secure it to the pocket bag. So now I can move on to assembling it to my front pocket. So this is gonna be the position of my pocket once it's finished. I need to assemble it together, placing the right side. I consider this to be the right side. So placing the right side onto the right side of the leg, putting some pins and assembling with a 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I ironed my pocket bag to the wrong side of the front leg, and what I wanted to show you is that here, when you iron that, make sure that you pull the pocket bag a little bit more to the wrong side so that it will not show at all. It will be top stitched, so it will be definitely secured in that position, but that's also a little extra detail that will make sure that on the right side you will never see your pocket bag. So let's top stitch that pocket bag opening twice. And now for the second pass. Let's close the bottom of our pocket bag with a French seam. So because we're gonna do a French seam, we're not gonna start stitching this way, closing right sides together, but we're gonna start stitching, closing wrong sides together. And we're gonna use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's about 0.6 centimeters, the bottom of it. And here we can trim or we can just remove a bit of the loose threads before we turn it to the right side. And when we turn it to the right side, we're gonna prepare the stitching to save a trip to the ironing board. We can prepare the stitching of the second line with our fingers. That's something that I learned actually preparing for the national test of sample sewing in France. So you just prepare your French seam with your fingers by kind of rolling gently the seam to position the first step seam here on the edge, and you just roll the seam all the way to the edge. It works really well. So sometimes it will allow you to skip going back to the iron. Sometimes it's just a good prep step before you try to iron your French seam, especially when you are dealing with complicated curves. Here you cannot actually open the seam, so that's actually going to be quite helpful. There it is. So let's close the bottom of our bag now. And I'm gonna do it just a little bit more than 1/4 inch because I did not trim, to make sure that I don't have any visible thread inside my pocket. That's it. I'm just going to now check the position of my pocket and baste it around onto the front legs so that it doesn't move anymore. And I'm gonna be basting it to the side seam and to the top edge. Let's move to our fly shield, and let me start by explaining to you why I particularly like the construction that I'm going to be using today. First, if I show you the wrong side, I just really like how clean it is. So you can see that I'm using bias binding, but even if you use serging all across the row edges, it will be really nice. The second thing that you will notice is that we have a flat fill seam for the front rise, which I think is a little nice extra step that provides stability, makes the seam really solid and is really nice on the inside when you wear your jeans. The third element is that the edges of the right side are all finished separate. So the first finish here is serging, but if you could also be serging the fly shield. So we have our front that is serged. It's completely separate from our zipper, and it's also separate from our fly shield. And the reason I do that is because over the years I learned that I tend to keep my Mime trousers for a really long time, or Mime jeans for a really long time, and the one repair that I will consistently need to do over the years is changing the zipper. And the way I was finishing this edge before all together made it really more time consuming and complicated to replace the zipper. So I tweaked this a little bit so that it's easier to keep your jeans for a really long time by just replacing the zipper in case it breaks. On the right side, the other reason why I like the construction I'm showing today is because it enables you to have continuous lines of top stitching. So you're going to see that we're going to be top stitching from the bottom of the rise all the way to the top of the waist in one pass. Then a second line that will come parallel and then meet our first line just after the facing of the zipper starts. And then we're also going to have continuous lines of top stitching for the zipper facing itself. So let's get started. So first, what we need to do is two simple seams. The first one is on the fly shield. We're gonna fold it back right sides together to sew the bottom slanted edge. And we're gonna stitch with a 3/8 1 centimeter seam allowance. And we're gonna align the bottom of that crotch seam at the inseam, and we're gonna align the thread tracing, the marks that we transferred in the beginning, the circular marks on your pattern pieces. And we're gonna stitch the crotch seam here, starting at 1.5 centimeter seam allowance all the way. This is gonna become our flat fell seam. And here, what you will notice is that your seam allowance will change a little bit and it's not the same on both sides. You don't need to worry or do anything, just continue until you reach the thread mark that you transferred here. That's it. So I'm gonna go to the machine and then we'll move on to the binding and finishing the different edges. Okay, so now that I stitched this seam and I also serged the row edge on the right front, not all the way, just where the seam allowance was a bit longer than on the rest. I'm going to add the bias binding to the row edge of the fly shield. So we have our bias binding and we're gonna just do it in one pass because that's just a finishing bias binding, so I'm not gonna do any complicated finish here. And I'm also going to bind the curved edge of the fly facing and just go a little bit slow when I'm going around the curve. And that's it. Now let's attach the fly facing to the left front. So we have our unfinished edge. We're gonna align it to the row edge of the left front all the way down to where the seam allowance changes, and just put a couple of pins before we stitch with a 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we're just gonna keep the right front out of the way and the seam allowance is flat so that nothing gets caught into that seam. We just put it at 3/8 of an inch, right sides together. Remove the pins. I'm going to grade the seam allowance. So here I'm going to be grading, I want to turn it to the right side. I'm going to be grading the seam allowance of the front, meaning I'm going to trim it in half and then I'm going to press the facing in its correct position. My fly facing is attached. I've graded my seam. I've pressed it to the wrong side. And now what we're going to do is that we're going to prepare the first line of stop stitching. So in order to do that, we're going to clip the seam allowance on the right front between the top of the crotch seam here where it stops and the bottom of the fly facing, so exactly between these 2 points, somewhere in the middle. And it's very important that you don't actually clip right here where the crotch seam is finishing, because over time this is gonna fray, and especially in denim you will have some white thread that will show through and it will weaken overall your jeans. But here you're gonna clip in between these 2 points. And you're gonna clip all the way to the seam just before. And what this is gonna do is that it's gonna allow us to treat this side independently when we're gonna attach the fly shield and the zipper. And on this side, we're gonna be able to prepare our seam to become a flat fell seam. So I'm gonna trim the left front seam allowance in half, as we usually do. And now I'm gonna turn it over, and at my ironing station, I'm going to fold in half the seam allowance, catch the smaller seam allowance under, put some pins if it helps after you press. So let me go iron this seam in place and we will top stitch together. Okay, we have our first line of stitching, and now we're gonna go up to the second line, and after 1.5 centimeter, about 5/8 of an inch, we're gonna pivot our second line and come and meet the first line. So I'm just gonna put a pin at 5/8 of an inch, 1.5 centimeter above the end of the crotch seam. As you can see, I like to check a few times that I'm catching my flat fell seam properly folded. I make sure the right side is out of my way. And when I get to my pin, I take it off. I keep my needle down. I pivot and I come to my first line of top stitching. A little tip when you're top stitching with a longer thread length, you can, when you want to very precisely stop somewhere and arrive somewhere, you can decrease the stitch length. Here we are. We have our first top stitching line. We have our second top stitching line. And as you can see, it's a very nice and neat result. It really comes all the way without any interruption, making also the top stitching more likely to last a really long time. Let's go to the next step. Now it's going to be time to attach our zipper to the right front. So first I change my thread to regular thread, and the second thing I'm going to do is change my presser foot so that I use a very narrow foot, or you can use a zipper presser foot to make sure that you can stitch pretty close to the teeth. So let's change that foot. I pinned my zipper edge to the edge of the right front. I made sure to start the teeth at 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimeter from where the waistband will be. So because that's the seam allowance of the waistband. And I pinned it all along the serged edge. And now I'm gonna stitch, removing the pins as I go, 1 centimeter from the edge to secure it in place. If I want to avoid a bump, I better try to zip my zipper up before I get to it. We continue and we make sure to only catch the right front serged edge. Okay, now the zipper is secured and it's already going to start to look like a zipper fly a little bit more. And now I'm going to add my zipper shield. So my zipper shield will come on top like so. Also aligned edge to edge with its bound edge. That's why we don't really need to bound the other edges, because these are going to be hidden below this layer. I'm just going to add a couple of pins to make sure that nothing changes while sewing. And I'm going to make them with the head down so it's easy to remove as I sew, or easier at least. And I'm going to stitch just 1/4 inch from the edge, so that's more or less where I top stitch my bias binding. And we have our zipper attached to the right front. So now what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna change my thread to top stitching thread so I can edge stitch all along the zipper on that folded edge. Let's edge stitch that zipper with our top stitching thread. I kept my narrow foot in to help get close to the zipper. So I'm gonna be top stitching through all the layers, just on the right front, just at the edge of the right front where it meets the zipper. Let's go. And you see also the importance of that little cut at the bottom of our right front, so that it allows us to really go all the way again without getting anything else caught. Now it's time to secure our zipper tape to the left front. So what we're gonna do is first we're gonna pin the fly in its final position. So we're gonna match the edge of the left front with the notch that is here 3/8 from the edge of the right front. And we're gonna put some pins to keep it in position while we place our second zipper ribbon. And now we can turn the work over, keep the zipper shield out of away, and we're gonna put some pins here to just catching the zipper facing, the fly facing, and the zipper ribbon. And before stitching it, I'm gonna be removing the pins that I have in the front so that I can open my zipper to make it easier. And I'm gonna be removing my pins as I go. Our zipper is now in its final position. The last step is going to be top stitching. So to top stitch, I'm going to be changing again my thread to my top stitching thread, and we're going to be using the zipper top stitching template. To top stitch our zipper fly, we're going to be using the fly top stitching template, and to use it, we're going to be placing it at the beginning of our crotch seam. So I'm going to be pinning it in place, aligned with the edge of the left front, and starting at that beginning. It doesn't need many pins, just a few to keep it in place through all layers. There, and I've also pinned out of my way my zipper shield to make sure that it doesn't get caught into that top stitching. So I pinned it to the right side, just out of the way under the right front. Let's start by top stitching just at the edge of our paper template. And after our first line of stitching, we can remove the paper template and sew the second one just inside that first line. And I'm going to be using the edge of my purse foot to serve as a guide. I want to keep maybe some pins in so that the layers don't shift, or you can put basting thread. So I'm going to be keeping my first line of top stitching right at this edge. I'm gonna finish securing the two bar tack locations, the fly shield under the fly facing. So for that, I removed the pins that were keeping it out of the way. I lay everything flat. And because I don't have a bar tack machine, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pass a few times in these two locations. So the first one is gonna be the top of the top stitching of the crotch right here. Going a bit back and forth, keeping my thread. And the second one is going to be the corner of our first line of the fly top stitching. And that's it. We have our finished fly. You can remove some loose threads, and we have a nice finished fly that sits well inside the facing and the shield, so it won't be visible when you wear your trousers. Moving on to our inseam, we're gonna start by laying right side up the back, and we're gonna be locating the notches in the inner leg so that we can match and put a couple of pins where we need to. So first I'm going to match my legs with my right leg on top of my back leg, so and right sides together. I'm gonna start by matching them at the hem, and I'm gonna be adding just a couple of pins. Then the second location where I'm gonna be matching them is at the notch. So here they are, the notches, aligning them together and placing a pin. I can put an extra pin in between just so that to make my life a little bit easier at the machine. And then I'm gonna be matching at my crotch seam or the back and front rise. And I'm gonna be careful to align the top stitching of my two flat fell seams. Here it might get a little bit bulky, and as you remember in the previous steps, if it gets too bulky for your machine at any stage, don't forget that you can always hammer it in place and it will really help instantaneously. Then the following notch, that is from the continuous on the second leg. So we're gonna be stitching the inseam in one continuous seam and the other hem. Now, what you will notice is that we have a difference in the length of our two inseams between the front and the back. And the back seam is a little bit shorter than the front inseam. This is intentional, and this is to help reduce a little bit the amount of ease that you have in the back thigh. So this is a little pattern making trick that you do to keep that seam a little bit shorter so that it will keep your back leg a bit smoother. And the way to assemble it is that you need to stretch that seam. You need to stretch the back leg into the front leg. And it's very easy to do because that seam is already cut at an angle. It's not exactly on 45% bias, but it's quite cut at an angle, so it's really easy to stretch it. Be mindful not to overdo it. You just need to match the front and the back and just add a couple of pins, and you stitch them like this at the machine using regular thread and a 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So I'm gonna stretch my second seam here, and I'm gonna go and stitch that first seam for our inseam that will also be a flat fell seam. I've sewn my inseam, and because the flat fell seam is going to be pressed to the back of the jeans, I've trimmed the left side seam allowance, and I already pre-pressed in position, folded over the front side seam allowance, and then flat onto the back side. And what I did also to prepare for the top stitching is to apply some pins regularly throughout all layers to make sure that my flat fell seam is not gonna move while I top stitch, because I'm gonna be top stitching 2 times on the right side, obviously, with top stitching thread. So I'm gonna be top stitching onto the back leg, just 1-2 millimeters away from the seam onto the back leg, and then again just short of 3/8 of an inch from the folded edge, or 1/4 inch from my first line of top stitching. So in order to make sure that nothing is gonna move, I placed pins along my seam. You can also baste with some basting thread if that's your preference, and I'm gonna be removing them as I sew. The one area where you need to particularly pay attention is probably where your front and back rise are gonna meet. That tends to create a little bit of extra bulk here because we do have several layers with the flat fell seams that are meeting here. So as I mentioned before, the easiest way to deal with this extra bulk is with your trusty hammer, and to hammer that seam just a couple of times to make sure that it's a little bit less bulky when you're gonna be passing on top of it with your machine. This will really help. And it's hard to feel the difference, but already if you press, you can really feel that things have significantly flattened on the inside. So I will top stitch, and then we are ready to move on to the side seam. So to move on to the side seam, I'm gonna bring the back of the trousers, the back of the jeans, over the front, right sides together, and I'm gonna be able to pin my side seams together. So I'm going to be pinning from the waist to the leg, and that's my preference in case you find some discrepancies, is to adjust rather at the leg length rather than at the waist. And I'm gonna look for my notches in order to make sure that my legs and my pattern pieces have not gotten too distorted, and I'm gonna add some pins. So next step is to move on to my machine with regular thread. I'm gonna be stitching my 2 side seams, right sides together with 1.5 centimeter, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then I will meet you at the serger to finish these seams together and press them towards the back. I already serged one of my side seams. One thing to know about serging is that there is a wrong side and right side to serging. So what comes when you are serging, what comes on top is considered the right side of serging, and as much as possible you should engineer it so that this is the side that will be visible. That means, for instance, if you plan to press your seams open, you should be serging with the right side of the fabric facing up. In our case here, since we're going to be pressing our side side seam towards the back, that means that we are serging with our front on top of the back instead of the other way around. So let me serge the second seam with the front leg on top. And here we are serging throughout all layers with both layers together because we're going to be pressing together towards the back. But if you wanted to do a little bit of a different finish, or if you wanted to have the ability to have your seam pressed open or finish with bias binding at the bottom because you want to do a cuff, a visible cuff, and fold it towards the right side, then you might want to serge or to bind the two legs separate. But here, this is not necessary, so I'm serging everything together. Now, if you are doing just the serge finish, you are done and you can move on to the top stitching of your side seam. But because I'm a little bit extra with this finish, I'm gonna also apply binding, the same binding I've been using for my other finishings, just for that section of the side seam. So I'm just gonna stitch my binding on the section where I have on top of where I have my overlocked or serged edge. I top stitched my left side seam right here on the edge, but on the side of the back, and I started at the top and I finished just where the pocket bag ends. And what I'm gonna do now is that I'm gonna be doing the same thing onto my right side seam. So I'm gonna place it under the machine with my top stitching thread on, and I'm gonna be aligning the side seam with the inner edge of my presser foot, but you can also use an edge stitching foot or any other foot that is helpful for you for this kind of task. And I'm gonna be top stitching all the way to the bottom of the pocket bag, and to help me locate that, since I'm working on the right side, I put a pin. I'm being careful not to catch anything else but the seam allowance under my seam. And when I reach the bottom, which is now, I'm just gonna do 3 small back stitches, front, and cut my thread. That's it. Our side seam is top stitched. Let's move on to our waistband and our belt loops. Okay, our Julia jeans are getting closer and closer to the finish line. We have now our inseam and our side seam all stitched. So as you can see, they start to look like real jeans. Now, what I'm gonna ask you not to do is something you will be very tempted to do now, and I think there are some downsides to doing it. My advice is to not try them on at this stage. I know it's very, very tempting. I want to try them on, believe me, but it's really a bit of a risky take to do now. If you try jeans now, it's very likely that you're gonna stretch the waist. It's not stabilized enough yet. It's not attached to the waistband. And if you try them on, it's very likely that you're gonna stretch certain areas, especially the ones that are not stitched onto anything. And you will find a big discrepancy between your waistband after and the waist of the jeans. So in case you don't listen to me and you try them on anyway, which is the most likely scenario, let's say, when you are going to baste or to pin your waistband to the waist of the jeans, my suggestion is to really follow the waistband. So the waistband is stabilized, it has not been manipulated too much until now. So you really follow this as your guide for what the finished waist circumference is supposed to be. And if you have certain areas that have stretched, either because you tried them on or during the construction process, you ease the jeans into the waistband. So you place the pins, you make sure that there are no pleats or gathers, but you kind of ease the excess between the pins. And if it helps, you press with your iron, you put a little bit of steam to resorb a little bit that excess before you stitch it. But before we attach our waistband, let's work on our belt loops. I finished preparing my belt loops, so I have 5 of them. They are 9.5 centimeters, 3 inches and 3/4 each. And before cutting them, I just top stitched them on each side. So the belt loop piece has a little bit extra, almost a bit over 1 extra belt loop, so that you can really select the ones that look the nicest. And now we're gonna position them on our jeans. So let's start with positioning our first belt loop at center back. So we're gonna place it over our center back seam, and you can either baste it, stitch it at 1/4 inch, 0.5 centimeters from the waist, or you can just insert pins like I'm doing now. The next belt loops are gonna be 1 centimeter from the front of the pocket, and every time I'm gonna position them right sides together with the jeans. So 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch from the pocket opening on the waistband. Same thing for the other side. And now for the intermediary belt loop, what we're gonna do is that we're going to bring together the front belt loop and the back one, and we're gonna divide the space in two, so you can just overlap them, fold together, and that's gonna give you the location of your kind of side loop. I'm gonna be placing it here. Right sides together, secured with a pin. Same thing on the other side. I place the front loop, the back loop together. I go into my jeans, half to half of it. That gives me the location for my last belt loop. Now you can either leave them like this if for you the pin is enough, or you can quickly stitch them in place on the seam allowance that will then be stitched to the waistband. So to prepare the waistband, if you are using the 34 to 46 size range, the waistband is just one long piece. If you are doing the 46 to 60 size range, you have a couple of steps to complete before you can get onto preparing the waistband. So you need to sew the side seams on both the outer and the inner waistband, and then you need to stitch them together at the upper edge. Basically, you will arrive to one long piece of waistband that is folded, pressed, wrong sides together. But before you move forward, it's important to make sure that you have correctly identified the right side, the side where you have an extra notch that marks the center front on your waistband, and the left side. As we mentioned before, we are doing a pair of jeans where the left side is coming onto the right side, and the easiest way is always to check on yourself. So you want to make sure that where you have the longer front extension that covers the fly shield comes under, and then you will have your left front that will come on top. That's the side where the fly facing is. And that helps you identify which one is the inner edge. In this construction, I am binding the inner edge. You can also serge it. The objective is to have it keep flat and not folded into the waistband to reduce a bit the bulk. But if you prefer a finish where you have it inside the waistband, you actually don't need to do any seam finish here. You don't need to bind it, and you don't need to overlock it. I also added a little tag just to make it a little extra fancy, and I pre-pressed my waistband lengthwise so we are ready to pin it onto the jeans. With our waistband prepared, I'm just going to pin it quickly to our jeans with the right sides together before I stitch them together with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So the first element is to align our notch here with the center front on the right front. So we want to start by aligning this notch. Then we're going to align our side seams with the side seam notch, if we can locate it. And I'm just gonna continue around and also pin to the center back. On the left front, I align the notch that is at 1 centimeter from the edge, the notch that marks the seam allowance here, with the folded edge and the edge of our fly facing. And now that I have pins all around, I'm going to stitch. I'm going to add my magnet in order to stay exactly at 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimeter from my needle. And now that I have my pins and my magnet in position, I'm going to stitch with that seam allowance. At the same time as I'm stitching, I am catching my belt loops that were pinned in place. And now I'm going to go and press that seam up, but also I'm going to fold my entire waistband in position. So let me go and press and show you the result before we start the top stitching. So I've pressed my seam allowances and my waistband in its final position, and on the wrong side what you will see is that I have kept the inner edge flat and the other edge is pressed up into the waistband. I have also pressed the short edge of the waistband 1 centimeter to the wrong side, and then I keep it in position with just a couple of pins right here before I go and top stitch all around my waistband. So what you can see is that already you can see it's very flat here, and it gives a little bit more a more tailored look to the jeans, and it limits a bit the bulk that you will have around the waist. Of course, you can also, if you want a more traditional jean construction, you can also fold that edge into the waistband and then top stitch all around, and that's a more classic jean construction. I just want to show you the other side. So on the left side of the jeans, you have here on the wrong side, you have up to where the zipper stop is going, and I don't like to have my seam and my seam binding that goes over this area. I feel like it keeps it a little bump when you zip your jeans up. So I manipulated a little bit the edges so that I can put it on the inside. I snipped into my seam allowance so that I can fold it at an angle, and I can just start from here keeping it flat. So here it's going to be pressed under, and I even kind of put the seam allowance under and tucked in very neatly before I start my top stitching, and keep it very flat. If this area is a little bit bulky before you go to the sewing machine, feel free to use your hammer to reduce it and to make it easier on your machine. And now I'm ready to go and top stitch. I'm about to start top stitching the waistband. This is a really good time to use your compensating foot or edge stitching foot, because we're going to have quite a lot of difference and we want to stay at a regular interval from our edge. And I put pins throughout to make sure that my waistband that is just folded into doesn't shift during the top stitching, which is something that will happen pretty often, especially if you're using a compensating foot, because the feed dogs and the foot is not going to carry the fabric at the same rate. So you really need to trust your pins here that have folded and kept maintained the waistband in the right position. So as you can see, when I'm about to go over layers, I do lift my presser foot manually in order not to have the needle struggle and start making shorter stitches. And I remove my pins every time I encounter one. I keep my work as flat as possible under the machine. And if I see that the fabric starts to be carried underway, I just lift my foot and readjust it. Another little top stitching trick here is to decrease the speed of the machine. So normally I would sew quite fast. Here I decrease the stitch so that it helps me and I'm not tempted to go too fast and to speed through my top stitching. And I'm just gonna make sure that I have my little tuck before I get to my edge. My waistband is completely top stitched, and now I'm just going to fix my belt loops in position. So for the belt loops, what I like to do for jeans is to measure 1 centimeter from the top, and you can either place a pin or you can put a little bit of chalk at 1 centimeter. And so I place a pin at 1 centimeter, and I'm gonna fold it to the wrong side. I'm gonna put the edge aligned with the edge of my jeans, making sure that the location it's placed on the belt loop will overlap itself completely. So you don't want to be too much to the side or too much on one side, because then everything becomes visible. So you go straight up. And that's where I'm going to first top stitch as if it was a continuous line from my waistband top stitching right here. And then I'm also going to top stitch the lower edge, the lower folded edge where it comes naturally for my belt loop here onto the jeans throughout all the layers. So this is gonna be my first belt loop. I go back and forth a few times to make it strong. I trim all my threads because with the top stitching thread it tends to make a little mess underneath. And then I'm gonna do my lower edge. You can remove the pin if it helps you keep it straighter throughout all layers. I'm gonna do the same thing for my lower edge. And that's it. We have our first belt loop that is in position. I'm going to do the same thing for the next 4, and then we'll start working on our waistband tabs. Let's talk about what the waistband tabs are for before we make them. So, the distinctive feature of the Julie jeans is those little tabs that you have on each side. They are aligned with the side seam, and they have a set of 2 buttons on each side so that you can switch their position. In the position that keeps the tab flat onto the waistband, the more relaxed position, you wear your jeans low on the hips, on the high hip, I would say. In a relaxed, slouchy position, the crotch is a little bit dropped and you have a nice, relaxed fit with the wide legs pulling a little bit at the bottom. Now, if you want to wear them higher, because for instance, you're wearing very flat shoes because it's raining and you don't want the bottom of your trousers of your jeans to be wet, because you want to create a bit more of a formal outfit or just for a different style, you can use the second buttons and it positions your jeans slightly higher on the waist. So here you have a more classic mid-rise. You can see that it hits at my belly button. You have a classic mid-rise, still with the relaxed hip, the relaxed crotch. It's not meant to be worn very high to keep that kind of cool, relaxed effect. And a little detail that I saw in ready-to-wear, I think was at Levi's, I saw a pair where they were using snaps instead of buttons. So that could be a really cool alternative to the classic buttons. It would probably be a little bit less bulky also when you button it the tighter position. And their tab, instead of being positioned towards the front of the waistband, was positioned towards the back. So it was more like doing an effect like this. And they were marketing it as a way to avoid gaping back into their jeans. So that's also a nice little detail that you could add on either other pairs of denim, either towards the front of the waistband here, where we are creating this extra volume that really also emphasizes the small waist and a little bit of volume here in the hip, or towards the back. Either way, it will always minimize any gaping that you could potentially have at the center back. So that's it. Let's make these waistband tabs. We're getting to the final stages and it's time to add and prepare our waistband tabs. So to do that, what I started by doing is folding the long edges 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch, to the wrong side and press them, and then I pressed the tab in 2 along the fold line. And I did the same thing for the second one. And now I'm just going to top stitch, edge stitch more accurately, around the 3 folded edges. This one is done. I'm gonna now just edge stitch my second waistband tab. And then we're gonna have to embroider the buttonholes now before we attach them to the jeans, as it's much easier to do than attach them to the jeans and embroider the buttonhole later. So let's move on to the buttonholes. I'm ready to do the buttonholes, but to do that I'm gonna have to go home. I haven't had the studio for very long, and before that I always worked from my home. So when I started sewing here, I put up two industrial machines, the stretch stitch and the serger, but I kept my home machine at home. I never lived in a house without a sewing machine. So even though it's 5 minutes away, I have not yet taken the extra step of bringing it to the studio. So we're gonna have to go there because that's where I have the ability to do buttonholes. So I took my thread and I marked already my buttonholes, so I have literally nothing to do but stitch once I get there. Welcome back. I've made it home and I already changed the thread on my Juki straight stitch machine, and I'm gonna be using this buttonhole attachment in order to make the buttonholes. So this machine has only a straight stitch. It does not have a zigzag stitch. That's why you need to have one of these attachments. This one is from Brother and I had it come from Japan, but I think now they are a bit more widely available for this machine. And I'm gonna be replacing my presser foot with this contraption. And before I do that, I'm gonna be inserting the template that I chose for my buttonhole. So this one is a keyhole 7/8 of an inch, 2.1 centimeter, and I'm gonna be inserting it at the back of the buttonhole attachment. And now I'm gonna be replacing my presser foot. And now before I do a proper buttonholes on my jeans, I'm gonna be doing a test version of something on a similar weight, just to make sure that everything is right, and also that I understand exactly on my attachment where it's gonna be the beginning and the end, so I can align it with the markings on my jeans. I lower my feed dogs. And as you can see, the result is quite neat, so I'm ready to move on to my jeans. I'm going to start with one of my waist tabs. So I know that I want the keyhole to be in this area, closer to the folded edge, and I'm gonna align it as far as it's going to go. I've just aligned my markings, and I'm just gonna stitch maybe 2 or 3 times over my buttonhole. And as you can see, the result is really nice. I think the one thing I could have done better was remove my thread tracing before I started, but I'm gonna be doing that for the next one. And now lastly, for the buttonhole on the left front of the jeans, I marked the edge pretty far from the edge. What you need to remember is that the buttonhole, the edge of the buttonhole will tend to be hit by the center of the button. And in the case of buttonhole jeans, they are pretty big. Half of the button will extend over and will come to the edge. And if you stitch your buttonhole too close to the edge, you will have the button that goes over the edge of the jeans themselves. So I like to keep them with at least 1/4 of an inch, 0.6 centimeter away from the edge. I want the edge of my button to not come closer than 0.4 of an inch, 0.6 centimeter off the edge of the jeans, which means that the buttonhole really needs to stop pretty far from that edge. My thread has broken, which is something that happens, so I'm just gonna thread it back and place it in the same spot. I am a little bit less happy with this buttonhole. I feel like this is the law, the one that you keep for last and that is the most important for you, will go bad. It will. That's it. It went bad. I think it's still acceptable. I mean, all the mess is mostly on the inside, so once I'm going to cut it open, it's actually going to be perfectly fine. We're done with the buttonholes. Let's go back to the studio. I'm walking back to the studio with the jeans with the buttonholes sewn on, and I brought a pair of shoes that I like because we're getting very close to the hemming stage, and I've learned my lesson before. You need to wear the proper shoes when you hem. Before I can place the buttons, I need to attach my waistband tabs to the waistband. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna take my waistband tab, I'm gonna place it right sides together with the waistband, and I'm gonna want to align the edge here, the unfinished edge, 1/4 inch away, 0.6 centimeters, 1/4 inch away from the side seam towards the front. And we're gonna be stitching exactly where the side seam would be. So if you're sewing the 46 to 60 size range, you have a side seam, which makes it a lot easier, but here we don't really have a side seam. So you have to you can draw it also with chalk. Imagine what the side seam would be, and we're gonna be stitching in that continuous line with the waistband tab towards the back so that we can then later fold it over before top stitching, keeping all the edges aligned, and just one line of stitching with regular thread to keep it in place. That's a good moment to use your hammer in case that's too many layers for your machine. And I'm gonna switch to my top stitching thread. I'm gonna trim a little bit here. I'm gonna switch to my top stitching thread, and I'm gonna top stitch here, 1/4 inch, 3/8, between 0.6 centimeters and 1 centimeter here to secure it in place. So I'm just gonna top stitch, and then we're gonna be attaching our buttons. Let's really finish now on our jeans by inserting our buttons. This is the kind of step that always makes me a little bit nervous because it feels irreversible. Today I'm gonna be using different buttons instead of the ones that you hammer in. These are the kind that you screw into. They come with a little screwdriver and they feel a little bit less definitive. And I also find them a little bit easier to insert. So what I did here is that I already inserted them into one of the waistband tabs for the waistband and also for the fly, so the main button. And now I'm gonna be doing the second waistband tab. So first I'm going to start by opening my buttonhole with my seam ripper. And if you're a bit stressed about going too far with your seam ripper, you can insert a pin at the end of the buttonhole, or you can start just short of the buttonhole, reverse it and restart from the other side, which is what I like to do. And now I'm gonna keep it flat for the first position, the less tight position of the waistband tab, and it's just gonna go flat straight into the waistband. So I'm going to position the button right here where it finishes, where the keyhole of the buttonhole finishes, and I'm gonna mark it and go through all layers with my awl. And I find my hole on the waistband. So on the wrong side, I insert my little screw. On the right side, I put my button. I can start screwing it by hand. Yeah, there you go. And now I'm gonna finish tightening it with the little screwdriver, holding it on the other side so that it doesn't move. And there you go. So it feels very secure. I haven't worn these kind of buttons yet, so I'll have to report back, but it does feel very nice and secure. And you can see that the waistband tab fits perfectly on it. For the second button, I'm going to position it 3 centimeters away from the center of my button. So the two centers are going to be 3 centimeters apart. It could be a good time now, if you have inserted only the further away position, to try it on and to see how far you want the next buttons to be, to see how tight you want to make the waistband, depending on how high you want to wear them in the higher position. But I'm gonna do 3 centimeters, so that's 1 inch and a quarter. I'm gonna measure with my gauge, 3 centimeters from the center. I'm gonna pierce through so that I can insert my screw on the wrong side, my button on the right side, which now goes a lot easier for some reason, and screw it tight in position. And there we go. We have our jeans that really look like jeans now. They have their buttons on. They have all the top stitching on. The very last step is hemming. So let me put them on so that we can mark the hem and make sure that I don't hem them too short, which is my nemesis and something that I do regularly. The jeans are on and you can tell that I'm already completely in love with them. I love how they feel. I love this fabric. As I said, it's a cotton hemp mix from Yard Blocks, and I really like it for this design. It was really easy to work with. I really enjoy how it feels on the body. So for the hem, quick tip. I don't know if it happens to you, but I personally always hem my pants shorter than I like them. So let's try to fix that today. I'm gonna be hemming them in their higher position because I really feel like this is where, if I want to wear them in their higher position, I'm gonna need them to be long enough. So I'm gonna button the tabs higher. And when they are in the higher position, I'm gonna be wanting to wear them with just regular sneakers. So I'm not gonna change my shoes. I'm 5'3", so it's 1.60 m. We're gonna have to shorten them. The patterns are drafted for a height of 165, 5'5". So that's what we're gonna be shortening for my slightly shorter frame. So let me see how much we're gonna be folding over. I'm just gonna turn the excess to the right side until I'm happy with the amount of pulling that I get, because I don't want them to be short or to look cropped. I want them to feel long even when they are in their higher position. So let's see how that feels. What I want to avoid also is the hem dragging at the back when they are in their higher position. So that's still a little bit long. Let me see here. I'm just gonna place a couple of pins to see how I like this length on my left leg. Okay, so now in this higher position, I can see that it just hits the bottom of my shoe but doesn't extend all the way to the floor. Feels pretty good. I'm gonna switch to the lower position and put on the low heels that I like to wear these days, just to control that it also works for that length. And I already rebuttoned them lower. And it also hits, kind of hiding most of the heel of my shoe. So I really like it. Yeah, I think that's the length we're gonna go with. So I'm gonna remove them. I'm gonna measure how much I want to hem here. I'm gonna leave an extra, I would say 1 inch. So 2.5 centimeters, so I can fold that in half, fold it 2 times, so that, in a total of 1 inch. And I'm gonna be top stitching my hem at that length. Final stitches, let's sew our hem. So I folded my hem allowance in half and pressed it, and I've also secured it with a few pins. And I'm just gonna top stitch it from the right side with my top stitching thread, and I also placed my magnet to stay at the same edge, the same distance from the edge. And I'm gonna be removing my pins as I go. I see sometimes that free arms is something that is targeted, especially I feel on beginner machines, as something necessary in order to hem pants and trousers. Personally, I haven't had a free arm machine in years, and I never missed that feature. I think there are probably some kind of sewing that would require it, but for hemming pants, it has never been a problem for me. All you need to do is to place it with the right side on the inside of the leg, and then you can just go around as I'm doing right now. A few back stitches. We're gonna trim the threads and stitch the second hem, and congratulations, you are done with your Julia jeans.